Hello everyone. In a previous video I made my very own rock tumbler, and in this video I'm going to be actually using it to, you guessed it, tumble some rocks. I've got my drum here, I've got some rocks off camera, I have my ceramic media, I've got all sorts of grits, so I'm going to run through the process because it is a process. It takes about a month start to finish to go through an entire batch, so let's go through the process and start with the actual rocks themselves. So here are the rocks that we're going to tumble, at least the first batch, and I think we're going to try to tumble as much as this as we can, but we're just going to weigh it and see how much we can fit in there. But it's a nice little selection of various rocks. I got this assortment of rocks off of Amazon. It's a good way to just kind of get a sampling of various rocks and see how they tumble and basically test and tweak the settings of your rock tumbler and the whole process. So that's really why I just bought these. I have some other rocks I'm going to tumble later. Then the next thing you want is a grit pack like what I've got right here, and I'll go into some details on like some of the filler and things like that later. And then you need some kind of vessel so that you spin this around. The rocks tumble inside, they rub against the grit, and that is ultimately what shapes the rock and then polishes the rock later on. You start out with a really high grit, low grit, I don't know how you want to say it, a coarse grit. Step one is a 60 grit. This will ultimately shape the rock. So if you have a lot of jagged edges or sharp corners, this will kind of start to roll those off, and the rocks will actually get a lot smaller after this phase. This is kind of the most important step because you really want to get the rock down to a nice smooth shape. If you have any sharp edges or cracks or things like that, it just really won't progress through the other stages nicely. So then the next step is the medium grit. This is 180 or 220. This one will kind of further shape the rock a little bit more. Then you have the 500 grit, which is the pre-polish stage. And the pre-polish is going to basically prepare the surface for the polish. Pre-polish, pretty simple. And then finally you have the 1200 grit, which is the final polishing phase. So at each one of these phases, you need to kind of take the rocks out, clean them, and then prep them for the next phase, and they will get smaller and smaller throughout the process, so then you might need to use something like this, which is basically just a filler. It just fills it in. When you put the rocks into your tumbler, you need to be somewhere around 2/3 full. If you're too full, there's not enough room for them to tumble around, and if it's too empty, they don't really tumble the right way. You need just the right amount so that they can actually tumble over each other and then rub against the grits. So let's load up with the very first grit, which is the 60. So here's what the tumbler looks like. There was about 3 pounds worth of rocks. You can see it's like 2/3 full. And now we're going to add the abrasive grit. There we go. That ended up being 2 tablespoons per pound, so 6 tablespoons. So here it is with the water inside. It said just enough water to cover the top of the rocks. So that's what water looks like inside of rocks. Pretty cool. The actual speed of the drum should be moving between 45 and 60 RPM, or about a revolution per second. This is of course going to vary depending on the size of the drum. If you have a much bigger drum, you're going to need to adjust the speed. If you have a really small drum, you're going to have to adjust the speed. So just kind of adjust the speed so you see it go around once about every second, maybe a little bit slower than that. So we've had this tumbling for 7 days now. This is the first step, so I'm going to open this up for the very first time and see what it looks like. It's probably not going to be too interesting. Ew, look at that. Smells kind of funny. Let's see. Oh God. Okay, it tastes terrible. Do not drink this. We're gonna get this dumped out and rinsed off so we can actually see what the rocks look like inside. Yeah. So in between each one of these grits, you need to fully dump everything out, rinse off the rocks, clean them, and all that good stuff. Couple little notes about that. One, do not drink this slurry. Two, absolutely do not dump this stuff down your drain. It will absolutely clog your pipes. It's almost like a concrete slurry, and when you flush it down, it's just not going to rinse through. So the best way to do this is to use a series of buckets, kind of rinse it off, and we just kind of set it outside, let the water evaporate off, and then you can just take the dried cake or whatever and toss it, or you can just rinse this off in your landscaping or something like that, but do not put this down the drain. There's really not a whole lot to talk about right here, but I do have quite a bit of footage, so I guess I should narrate some of it. We just had a series of buckets set up with water, and we just kind of grabbed the rocks one by one, used some brushes and stuff like that just to clean them off. You do need to get all of the grit off of this. You really need to scrub the rocks. One of the mistakes that I made a long time ago when we were doing rock tumbling is you just kind of rinse them off and throw them in the next step, and that's going to be a problem. Some of that 60 grit is still in there, and as the rocks kind of break apart, they kind of form their own grit, if that makes sense. And so you really want to get these down to the cleanest you can. And using a little wire brush or nylon brush in the little crevices, old toothbrushes work. You really need to get them as clean as possible. Then dunk them in water, maybe give them a second cleaning. Getting them clean in between each step is critically important. Here's what the first batch looks like after the first step. It's kind of hard to see on camera. They're actually quite smooth and very supple to the feel, but they really don't have any polish to them. So let me put these in water to give you a little bit better idea what they look like when they're wet. So as you can see, stuff like this doesn't really look like much, but if we get it wet, you can get an idea what it's going to look like when it's fully polished. Beautiful. So yeah, that's more what we're going for, and that's ultimately what these are going to look like when they're fully polished. So time to move on to the next step. We've already removed all the ones that are still a little bit rough that would need further polishing or further cutting with the abrasive. So these are all smooth and ready to go on to the next step, which is very similar to the first step. It's just basically a different grit. So we lost quite a bit of volume in that first step, so we need to fill this up to where it's still about 2/3. So we're going to use some sort of filler in there so that we get more in there. If you don't have enough in there, then they just kind of knock against each other, and it's a bad thing. So let's get some filler in there and run the second step. Do a line of this. So as we move on to the second stage, it's important to note that the grit is based on the weight of the rocks. And as you tumble them, the weight is going to decrease, so you need to weigh them at each step. We actually wrote the weights of the drums on the outside of each one of the drums, and then we can weigh it with the rocks in there and kind of get a feel for how much rock is actually in there, and then we can add the appropriate amount of grit. The original batch of rocks was about 3 pounds, and now we're down to about 1.5 pounds. So to fill up that extra volume, we're using these ceramic filler pellets. It's exactly what it sounds like. They're just little smooth pieces of ceramic that will help fill up the barrel. In addition to filling it up, they also act as a little bit of a sound cushioner and makes the whole process a lot quieter. So it might not be a bad idea to add these all the time just because it makes it so much quieter. After all this is added, we tumble exactly like we did in the first process, but we only did about 5 days this time. So this is what the rocks look like after the second phase, and they look suspiciously similar to the first phase. I think the only real difference here is they took a little bit less to kind of get the grit and the grime off of them, and they're just a little bit smoother overall. There's just less nooks and crannies. So we're going to go ahead and put this in for the third and final cutting phase, and then we'll move on to the finishing phase. So I kind of jumped ahead a little bit. We went ahead and did the third stage. I didn't film anything from that because it's pretty much the exact same process, just fill everything up. We started at 3 pounds, we went down to 1.5, now we're down to 1.0 2.5. So we really didn't lose that much in the last step, and everything is very smooth and really pretty. So we are ready for the final polishing step. The final polishing step is slightly different because you need to use a brand new drum for this. And that is why we have the 2 drums. We've been using the one for all of the first, second, and third steps, but for the final step, we need to use a brand new drum because any amount of grit can contaminate it. So we need to put this into the brand new one with the polishing compound. So you don't actually need a new drum every time, you just need one that has only been used for the finishing step. So here the only thing left to do is fill this up with water, put on the tumbler, and wait 5 to 7 days for the finished results. So here is the final product. This has been tumbling for 7 days, and I just wanted to do this kind of unboxing and reveal to give you an idea what they look like. This is what it looks like when you open it up. So you're not doing anything wrong. This is what you're going to see. Let's go ahead and get some clean water on this and rinse off the stones. And here is the finished product. I can actually put a little frame of what they originally looked like. So they originally looked like this, and then what the next step, and then, I don't know, the other steps. And then here is what they finally look like. Some of these actually polished up really nice, like this one. I don't even know what that's going to show up like on camera, but it is really, really shiny. That one was particularly good. This one just feels like glass. It is really, really, really shiny. So those turned out good. Some of these others, like this, maybe got stuck somewhere. It kind of has a little bit of a matte feel. It still doesn't feel like it's fully polished. We might want to throw that one back in. But yeah, a lot of the quartz feels really nice. Quartz polishes up real nice. You can see this. It just has a lot of nice, really pretty colors in them. So yeah, this is rock tumbling. It's pretty cool. You do lose quite a bit. This is a lot less in volume than what we started with. So you got to start out with some pretty large rocks if you want to end up with some large ones. But I mean, look at this. It's cool. It was really cool. And I think this whole thing was just a few bucks off of Amazon, just Amazon Prime. We just got them and tumbled them. So yeah, it's a nice little hobby. So hopefully this video gives you a little bit better idea of what is involved in rock tumbling, and with my previous video you can see what it takes to build your very own rock tumbler. All the links for the media and even these rocks is down below in the description, so go ahead and check that out. It is a really cool way to pass the time if you're into rocks, because it's just neat looking at these things and looking at all the patterns inside. Maybe someday I'll get out my macro lens and we'll do some macro shots of these. But anyway, thanks for watching. Check out my Facebook page for any updates to my channel, and see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.